Y'all, Courtney Clenney was originally charged with second-degree murder, but 4 years later, she gets one of the sweetest deals I've ever seen. She would plead guilty to manslaughter with a deadly weapon, get 6 years total, with credit going all the way back to her arrest in August of 2022. So how did this case go from second-degree murder to 6 years? Hello, Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa. That's the sofa we keep talking about. My name's Paul if you're new here, and if you're not new here, we'll just go ahead and call me get out of jail free card, because that seems like it's exactly what Courtney Clenney used to get out of this situation she found herself in. Y'all go ahead and make sure your cup is filled up to the brim and your true crime blankie is ready to be snuggled, and let's go ahead and dive in. Today we're talking about Courtney Clenney and the death of her boyfriend Christian Obumseli, because after years of waiting for what looked like, to me at least, was going to be a very complicated, very salacious self-defense murder trial, well, that trial never happened. Instead, the case ended with a plea. And I want to start with the ending of the story so that A, you don't gotta wait to get to the T, but secondly, so we can dissect it and make sense of what took place. So let's look a little bit of a timeline and kind of backtrack on that timeline. And we're gonna start with recently, August 10th of 2026. So you'll see here on the screen, the very bottom where we'll start off with that she takes the plea deal. Now in July 2026, and we'll talk about this, wrongful death case settled, Clenney reaches an undisclosed settlement with Christian's family. January of 2024, new computer access charges. Clenney and her parents faced additional felony charges involving Christian's laptop. Now those would have since been settled, at least with her parents. Late 2022 through 2023, held without bond, Clenney remains jailed while awaiting trial. August 10th, 2022, she's arrested in Hawaii and charged with the second-degree charges. April 3rd is when Christian was fatally stabbed, and that is when she will start her narrative that she acted in self-defense. So back to current times, she would get sentenced to 6 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation with mental health treatment related conditions. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes with this. Now, like I said earlier, she received credit dating back to her August 10th, 2022 arrest. Now, of course, when people saw this, including myself, and they're like, 6 years, that's all she got was 6 years. The shock was immense, right? And trust me, I 100% get it. I felt the same way too. And here's one of the reasons why, for me at least. So if you follow this from the time that it popped off, right, back in 2022, this case slowly kind of morphed and turned the narrative in the media. You know, at first it was like all this stuff happened, and we'll get into that and whatnot. And then it would change, and this would come out and that would come out, and it was just salacious and salacious. And it was this buildup, and her lawyer successfully dragged this out and dragged this out and dragged this out years and years and years. And this works oftentimes in the defendant's favor, as it did here with Courtney, in my opinion. Now, one thing that's wild to me is she's going to be able to walk away from this with technically not being like a convicted, like that word, murderer, you know, first degree murder, that type thing. She's getting out of this like manslaughter, right? So essentially, even though the details are about the same, in my opinion, this is going to allow her to kind of get the lesser of the bad sounding charges, but also stick to the narrative that she was forming along the way, that she was going to present in court had it gone to a jury trial. Okay, so let's go over some quick context for those who are new to this case or might not be overly familiar with it. Christian died after he was stabbed in the couple's Miami apartment in April of 2022. Courtney acknowledged causing the fatal injury, but her version was she acted in self-defense. Now, prosecutors didn't accept that as the legal explanation for what happened. And Courtney was eventually arrested and charged with those second-degree murder charges. Now, from there, the case spent years moving toward trial. And what it came down to is whether a jury was going to believe that the fatal stabbing was legally justified, or whether the state could convince them it was murder. And that brings us to the evidence problem at the center of the case. So let's go over a few things that stuck out to me about why the prosecutors thought that this was murder. So one of the big things, of course, was that fatal wound to Christian, okay? Now, this is a big thing that came out and that would continue to come out and darken this trial, if you would, because Courtney would be saying, hey, look, it was self-defense. I threw this knife. It hit him. The prosecution has a very different story. At an earlier bond and pretrial release hearing, reporting on the court's ruling described medical examiner testimony that the fatal wound was inconsistent with Courtney's account that she had thrown that knife from about 10 feet away. Now, another dynamic was that 911 phone call. So Courtney would place the phone call and she's screaming, there's dogs barking, there's all sorts of chaos going on. She's screaming, my boyfriend's dying of a stab wound. And then you can hear him in the background being like, I'm gonna die, I can't feel my arm. And she's saying, baby, I'm so sorry, baby, I'm so sorry. And now a huge part of this, was the relationship evidence. Prosecutors had lots of that they were going to be presenting, and so did Courtney in her defense. However, before we jump into that, let's talk very quickly about who is who and how they met, because you're going to see two different trajectories that were being built up about this relationship that just doesn't make sense. So how do you get to him dying in their apartment from a stab wound that she says she threw a knife from across the room in self-defense, and sadly, he's not here to ever tell his story. So Courtney had a little bit of a, let's say, reputation, but long before all that, she was building a very different public identity. She grew up in Texas. She was intensely competitive and athletic, and she participated in everything from soccer, volleyball, gymnastics, horseback riding, you name it. Now, eventually, competitive springboard diving became her main focus. Now, as she went into her teens, that kind of competitive sports type stuff switched over to entertainment. Now, she got super into like acting, dancing, voice stuff, you name it. And she would move to LA to pursue acting, and she did some commercials and stuff like that. Now, she would use the name Courtney Taylor in this, but acting never really became what she wanted it to. Instead, she would reinvent herself, but this time it was through fitness competitions, modeling, social media, you name it. Now, by 2020, Courtney Taylor had become very successful as an online brand, mostly with the OF, if you know what I'm talking about, and Instagram. She had a massive following on Instagram and OF, but a huge amount of money was coming from OF, and I'm talking like over $1 million, like almost 2 million in like the height of it. So she was making tons of money, okay, from this, and she was very successful at it. So on the surface level, she looked like somebody who kind of had it all, right? She was making all this money, very competitive, doing this, doing that, but there was way more going on beneath that surface. Let's talk about Christian. Christian was born on April 12th, 1994 in Dallas, Texas. He was the youngest child in a close-knit family. Now, to his family and friends, he was known as Toby. He grew up surrounded by siblings. He was really close to his family, and he had a Nigerian heritage that he was very close to throughout his life. Now, Christian was also an athlete. So at his high school, he played middle linebacker. He served as team captain. He earned first team all-district honors. After he graduated in 2012, he received a football scholarship to Abilene Christian University before later transferring to Texas Tech University. Now, he eventually began pursuing engineering, business opportunities. He got really into like real estate, cryptocurrency. His friends remembered him as very outgoing, adventurous, and social, somebody who liked to travel, people, try new things, all that, right? Now, the photographs you're seeing tell a much fuller story than the one that would later emerge in court filings and headlines. He was a son, he was a brother, he was a friend, he was an athlete, and in 2020, his life would intersect with Courtney Clenney's. So Austin, Texas in November of 2020, Courtney and Christian were both living there. Now, they had arrived by very different ways, right? Courtney had returned to Texas after several years in LA. Her career had shifted away from that traditional acting and all that kind of stuff towards her social media presence, let's say. Now, Christian had made his way to Austin, where he was pursuing business opportunities and exploring interests, real estate, crypto, all that stuff we talked about. So, they're both young, they're ambitious, they're doing this whole new chapter, new place, new me, all that. So it's in Austin that they will meet. Now, the exact circumstances of that first meeting, I haven't really found out what exactly those were, but what we do know is that the connection developed quickly. And before long, they would become a couple. So not long after they met, it seems like they were really honestly inseparable. They spent tons of time together in Austin. And if you look back through a lot of their social media and whatnot, you see how much like adventure adventure comes through. They were always doing stuff. Everything looked like this exotic life, right? Where you're just like, wow, they're traveling, they're doing this, they're doing fun stuff. It looked like they had the world in the palm of their hands. But social media only captured part of their relationship, because behind all those pictures was a relationship that could be intensely volatile. Arguments, confrontations, fights, you name it. These would later become central to both the prosecution and the defense. And on April 3rd, 2022, everything absolutely changed. So now here's the thing. That's the basis of the relationship. So as this case unfolds, as the trial's coming up and whatnot, some evidence would come out at the very beginning that made Christian look like he was the aggressor. You know, I can remember seeing like the body cam footage of her and him in the lobby or wherever it was where she lived, and her crying and all this, like, I told him not to be here. He needs to go. He needs to leave. Then there was a neighbor who came out and was like, I saw, him through their window, like, beating up on her and whatnot. So it looked really bad. However, then Christian's family really fought to get other video evidence released. And as this evidence came out, it was like, whoa, game changer. We would see footage of Courtney going off on Christian elevators, beating on him, her losing it at photo shoots because he looked at another girl, her police interrogation right after the event, that didn't age well either. None of this looked good, okay? She looked like the aggressor at this point, which leads us back to the overall story that Courtney was planning on presenting at trial. So let's talk about some of the things that the defense was going to want the jury to make note of. So Courtney's defense was going down the pipeline of self-defense and battered spouse theories. Courtney's defense was going down the pipeline of self-defense, battered spouse syndrome theories, all this type of stuff. Very Sarah Boone-esque. Now, one major thing that took place, and this is going to be sofa speculation with some of this, is to my thoughts that we'll get to in the end about how I think that this played out the way it did. But shortly before the plea and some preliminary hearings and whatnot, defense attorneys were going to be using some information that came from a 2020 animal cruelty arrest warrant connected to Christian. Now, before we get into this, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, this is trigger warning. We're going to talk about animal stuff for a second. Okay, so the case took place in Travis, Texas, back in November of 2020. And essentially what took place is an apartment complex that he moved out of, went in there and found a dog in a crate, like in the closet or something like that, that basically died of, it wasn't cared for, like it starved or, whatever happened, dehydrated to death. And so this is where these charges stemmed from. So that was going to be coming out in court. And essentially the defense was like, look, if you get up here and present and open the door of like, oh, he was this, really nice guy and he didn't do this and he didn't do that. They were like, this is one of the things that we're going to be putting out there for the jury to see. How do you think that would land? Now, also, Courtney had her own version of events, very similar to Sarah Boone with the videos and whatnot. Courtney had her own thing of this, of like, well, here's my version of it. Look at these, right? And that was going to be a big thing that was going to pop off at court, is the prosecution showing their version and Courtney showing hers. So it makes you wonder from Courtney's side, like, well, did they have major stuff that they could show? Or is it going to be more of the elevator stuff, right? And if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about, where she beats the living ever, what out of this man, and he's just trying to keep her off of him. So also the defense was going to have the neighbor who was like, I saw him beating up on her. So you see the narrative that's kind of coming out where it's like, okay, well, again, they would have to decide. And with these cases, just like we do, the jury's being asked to pick a side, right? They're going to put all this evidence in front of them and be like, well, you pick which reality you're going with. Who sold it to you better? Who sold it to you, weaker? And that's who they tend to go with. Obviously, when you start lining these chips up and whatnot on each side before going to trial, this can weigh heavily on the potential outcome. And so leading up to that, clearly in this case, it ended up leading to a plea. So let's talk about what the plea deal changed. So one huge thing is when she pled guilty to this, like the uncertainty of all those chips on the table for both sides was gone, right? She knew what her sentence was going to be, which was a really sweet one. That the state didn't have to worry about like, okay, we're going to go up here and play the chips of like, okay, we're going to get a jury to come in and can we win the case? It's going to be a bunch of money, et cetera, right? So I think that plea deals work good in that way for both parties. Not that I agree with them in this specific case, but you see where I'm going. Now, also, it's important to note that according to the Miami-Dade made state attorney's statement. This plea deal was reached in agreement and like approval from Christian's family. So that was major. Now, another thing that was going on here with all that is that knife experts were going to be called into play here. One of the things that the state was arguing is the trajectory of the wound, because it had a downward trajectory wherever it was at. I forget where, like somewhere around here or whatever. And so with Courtney's thing of like, I threw it from here, it was almost like, well, how did it go? It was almost like it came from here, right? We'll talk about my theory about what happened here in just a minute at the end. Now, another major thing that the plea deal did is it got her the sweetest deal I've seen in a long time. So first of all, 6 years. Let's talk about that because it's literally stopped you in your tracks, and let's kind of break it down real quick. Okay, so she's sentenced to 6 years in the Florida State Prison. She already spent around 4 years behind bars awaiting trial. So she is going to get credit for that time, which substantially reduces the amount her sentence has left to serve. Now, after her release, she starts 5 years probation. Now, this includes mandatory mental health and substance abuse evaluations, along with compliance and any kind of recommended treatment. So 6 years in prison, 4 already served, 5 years of probation to follow. She's basically getting a very sweet deal that lets her go home very soon. Now, let's take a look for a moment at her new mugshot and the information at her inmate thing or whatever you call it. Okay, now see on the screen her new mugshot when she got checked into prison, and you'll see here, you know, Courtney Clenney, female, born 96. Now, she is at least the time of this recording, which is August 23rd, she's at the Florida Women's Reception Center in Ocala, Florida, where old Sarah Boone has graced the hallways. Know that. Now also, look at here, expected release date 08/07/2028. So I did a little bit of like research into how it works in Florida with like time served and when you get to go home and when you get to do this and with her charges and all that. Because one of the things that takes place is when you hit a certain amount of time where it's like, I'm making this up, I have 24 months left of my prison sentence. When a certain amount of that time they start doing almost like would be considered, if your security level is okay, a transitory type thing where it's like you could be working or you could be doing this. Now the work might be at a certain type camp and then you can get to work release or whatever. Again, a lot of this is just contingent and just me kind of like going, you know, on a little Google hunt. So it's not verified. It's not factual. This is just me, you know, using Google as a research tool for this part right here and having it kind of do some equations for me. So the point of that being though, is that with her being where she's at, and once they decide what her security level is, which it sounds like she'll probably get medium and then work her way down to minimum, she's going to be entering into like early next year this zone of some of these things where you might be able to start transitioning or whatever. Like I don't know exactly what it's called or what exactly the program even entails really. But my point being again is that unless she makes it hard time, she's going to do pretty easy time, right? I think she's been having fun. I mean, we see her laughing and joking in court, right? So it's like, you know, how much tougher could it be going to prison, right? It's going to be a little bit of a different story. Maybe they'll Sarah Boone's will help her out. Hell, I don't know. So now let's talk about one last component that I wanted to speak of here, and that's the civil settlement. So remember, I told you that kind of like weeks leading up to this or whatever, there was a settlement with Christian's family. Now there's multiple things going on here in this lawsuit. So Christian's family originally brought a wrongful death claim against Courtney, as well as the condo building, that's One Paricio, and the property management company First Service Residential. Now the family agreed to dismiss the lawsuit with prejudice. So the legal filings reveal that the corporate co-defendants agreed to cover things like outstanding medical and hospital bills and some other like associated liens and whatnot. Now, Courtney reached a private settlement with the family in weeks prior to resolving the criminal case, where she pled guilty and did all the things we've been talking about. Now, of course, the details of this are unknown. We do not know. So this brings us down to some closing thoughts, things of this nature. So first of all, did Courtney get away with murder? Okay, in my opinion. Yeah, she got away with it. honestly, I'm shocked sitting here recording this, okay? She knows when she's going home. The state doesn't have to take it to trial. You know, the family got the homicide conviction without having to go through a trial, which is huge. Remember, they were like, this has we're cool with this, okay? So they didn't have to get raked through all that. So was it murder or was it legally justified self-defense? I want to know your opinions down in the comment section. This is one that I've been asked and whatnot. Okay, so my opinion is that it was murder. Okay. And I think that what took place is that she, and I don't know with Christian, I would sit here and say that I would assume he was partying right alongside of her if they were this close and a couple and whatnot, but I can't say for sure, right? And he's not here to speak. So what appears to me is that she would go snow skiing a lot, if you know what I'm talking about, probably amongst other things. And she did not handle that very well and probably had lack of sleep. She looked terrible in some of the photos that if you go through her like stuff that she photo shoots she was doing, she would be covered in bruises and just look horrible. And her, even in the police interrogation, I mean, she just seemed skeeted out, right? So I think something took place that morning. He could have blinked wrong and she went berserk on him. And I think she stabbed him, plain and simple. And as soon as she did it, she was like, oh my God, she messed up. And then she called 911 and we kind of met her in that case. And I think that what took place is as the trial was going, number one, her lawyers were very successful at dragging this out and putting the family through a lot. And I mean, this has been years in the making, right? And I think they were digging up dirt. And I think they were presenting stuff. And I think that basically they sat here and said, we are going to be punching low if we go to trial. And we're going to bring this out and we're going to bring that out. And we're going to bring this out. And I think that the state probably looked at it and said, how is this going to land with a jury, A, B, and C? Even though it looks like she absolutely did this, they probably have a successful case to prove, hey, you know what? This might have happened here, but all this was going on over here too. So what are we going to do with it? And they might have sat here and said, let's meet in the middle. Now, here's the other thing. The fact of like the 6-year thing is pretty shocking to me because that's so low. Like I honestly was thinking it was going to be 15 years. I was like, probably 15 years, she'll go do 6, or like whatever the half is, you know what I'm saying? And when it wasn't that, I was just like, whoa, that's a sweet deal she got. I mean, she's going home and can have a whole new life. And I don't know how this works. And this is so for speculation. This is not factual. This is just my opinion. So this is all that, what I'm about to say. I don't know how these things work. If Courtney Clenney's team was able to go in there and say, hey, look, we're going to do these things and say this about Christian on the stand if we go to trial. However, if you will plea out, you save everything from this. The family's sick of being run through this. And yeah, whatever little personal lawsuit we have going on, her family will pay this much, but this is the time that she has to get. It has to be the low end of the sentencing or it's no deal. You see what I'm saying? And so that's where I'm curious if that's how that landed. And the prosecutor is basically like, okay, the family says they're cool with it. We don't have to do this. Our case has maybe fallen apart with how we were going to do it, et cetera, et cetera. So no one now will ever factually know except for Courtney and Christian and others who dealt with them. Because there's plenty of people that came out that dealt with them in person that were like, she's, whatever. Okay, like this girl she dangerous, right? So, but people like, the general public, me and whatnot, will never know. I wanted to see what happened at trial. If his family, meaning Christian's family, is glad that they don't have to go through that trial and listen to their son, their brother, their friend, their this or that being disparaged and trashed in court, well, then I'm great for them, right? Because at the end of the day, like that's whose opinion is most important is the victim, their family, their survivors, right? So that part, I'm like, okay, if they are giving it their blessing, they're giving it their blessing, and it is what it is. Okay, so I want to know where y'all land on this one. So do you see this as like a reasonable trade-off for both sides? Like whatever took place behind the scenes, we don't know. Like, do you feel like, yeah, probably this happened, and everybody was like, okay, we just want to like end this right now. It is what it is. Nothing's going to bring him back, but we don't want to go through this drama anymore. Now, also with the whole 6 years thing, does like the sentence and number bother you specifically, or does the manslaughter plea make more sense? Like if we looked at all the evidence that was probably going to come out, are you like, yeah, probably this was better to plea out? Or do you think like, no, they should have gone to court and taken their chances? Let me know where you land on all that in the comments. And while you are down there, if you could drop off some little sofas for myself, Roscoe and Spirit, he's hiding behind me, and the boys who are in the crib sleeping. Also, if you enjoyed the vibe, well, don't forget to subscribe. And if you like my type, go on and give me a hype. Now, until we get down into that comment section on that sofa, do all the stuff we've been talking about, I'll see y'all soon.